When people ask me about my work as a philosopher, I often tell them that most normal people would look at their watch and say, what time is it? But a philosopher would look at her watch and say, what is time? So it makes me think that when I'm asked to speak about using story to reconnect with nature, I should do my philosophical work, that is to study the ideas that shape our lives. If I were to do that, I would ask, what is a story? What is nature? What does it mean to reconnect with nature? To what extent is nature already a story waiting to be told in words, has its own plot, has its setting, has its characters? But I don't want to do any analysis of that sort today. I want to read a story. I want to read a story, then I want to talk a little bit about story, and then I'd like to close by reading another one. Does that suit you? The first one is called The World Depends on This. The message machine was blinking when I got home from work. First, I want you to know that your daughter's going to be fine. I braced myself for whatever would come next. She was arrested during the demonstrations. They're holding her in the San Francisco County Jail. Frank and I had been watching world news all day. Now suddenly this wasn't about world news. It was about our daughter and a parent's fears. What will she eat? How will she sleep? Do the handcuffs cut her wrists? The night before, I dreamed about Erin. She was one of the young people in an outdoor clothing catalog, striding out in autumn colors, her hair as bright as apricots. But she wasn't in some dreamy, sun-saturated place now. She was sitting in a small cube of light in a darkened jail. I tried to picture a jail at night. Do the other inmates sleep splay-legged and heavy on their backs? Do they curl up as if they were babies? And our daughter, surely she's sitting awake on a bench with her knees to her chest and her arms wrapped around them. She'd be cold in that dark place. Babies startle if they're not wrapped tightly. We learned this in a child care class before she was born. Their bodies twitch and their arms flail as they sleep, and if nothing's holding them, they're afraid. So you have to wrap a newborn baby. We held our daughter close and wrapped her in blankets tight as corn in the husk. We loved her so much and raised her so carefully, and isn't this what all parents do if they can? Piano lessons, art lessons, $100 safety seat for the car. When she learned to drive, we tried to keep track of where she went and when she would be home. It never occurred to us that she would go to jail. So here's the first thing she said when she called collect from the holding cell. What can I say to keep you from worrying? To keep a parent from worrying. Tell us you're home in bed, I said. But Frank took the phone from my hand. She told him she was in a holding cell with dozens of other women. They're strong, amazing women, many of them mothers and grandmothers, many elegantly dressed in black, she said. And Frank thought that Erin's own voice was strong and amazing, more certain than he'd ever heard it. To pass the time, the women are teaching each other to dance, she said. They're placing calls to news agencies, but they can't get through. Bombs are falling. Newspapers aren't answering their phones. Injustice and environmental destruction tangle in nets of violence and profit around the world. And all these beautiful women are dancing in jail. The police released Erin at 2:30 in the morning. A friend came into the city to drive her home. Don't all parents want the world for their children? Fellow parents, tell me, wouldn't we do anything for them? To give them big houses, we'll cut ancient forests. To give them perfect fruit, we'll poison their food with pesticides. To give them the latest technologies, we'll reduce entire valleys to toxic dumps. To give them the best education, we'll invest in companies that profit from death. To keep them safe, we'll deny them the right to privacy, to travel unimpeded, to peacefully assemble, and to give them peace. To give them peace, we will kill other people's children or send them to be killed, and amass enough weapons to kill the children again, kill them 20 times if necessary. We would do anything for our children, but the one big thing. Stop and ask ourselves, what are we doing and allowing to be done? How everyday and ordinary are our disastrous decisions. Frank and I go busily about buying this or that, voting or not, burning up gasoline or jet fuel or split pine, on a small scale in the short term, making things work for our children, forgetting that whatever's left of the world is a place where they will have to live. What will our grandchildren say? I think I can guess. How could you not have known? What more evidence did you need that your lives, your comfortable lives, would do so much damage to ours? Did you think you could wage war against nations without waging war against the earth? Didn't you wonder what we would drink once you had poisoned the aquifers? Didn't you wonder what we would breathe once you poisoned the air? Did you stop to ask where we would find solace in a world without wild things? Did you think it all belonged to you, this beautiful earth? You, who loved your children, did you think we could live without clean air and healthy cities? You, who loved the earth, did you think we could live without birdsong and swaying trees? And if you knew, how could you not care? What could matter more to you than your children and their babies? How could a parent destroy what's life-giving and astonishing in a child's world? And if you knew, and if you cared, how could you not act? What excuses did you make? And now, what would you have us do? 2 days after she got out of jail, we walked with Aaron beside the ocean. Under a steep headland, we came across a jumbled heap of fishing net, string, nylon cord, and bullwhip kelp intricately tangled. Buoys were smashed and buried beyond hope. This is what the world is, she said. She tugged at a rope and the net's gone to tangled ruin drifted with sand. Yes, but you don't have to go to jail to say so. There are other ways, I said softly, knowing I should be still. She answered as softly, Then you need to show me those ways, she said. Don't tell me, show me. Dear God, I didn't know what to do, what to hope, what to fear, what to invest in and what to give up, what to insist on and what to refuse, how to go on with living in a time of death. All I know is how to hold my daughter, wrapping my arms tight around her shoulders. Right now, the world depends on this. So to the issue, what can a story do? How can a story possibly save us? What the hell am I doing, a classically trained analytic philosopher, an environmental activist, a presumably rational person, sitting around writing stories? What's the use of a story? I could make a long list, but I want to limit myself to 3 things. By the way, let me just tell you that I always ask my students to imagine the future. I always ask my students to write a letter back in time to their grandchildren. So when Aaron ended up in jail, it was quite a natural thing for me to do, was to stay up all night and do my own assignment. So what's the use of a story? Number 1, stories tell the truth. And what could be more important than telling the truth in a world built so steadily of lies? It seems to me that we whose lives depend on the life-sustaining systems of the earth can only act in ways that destroy them, only if we successfully convince ourselves, against all the evidence, that our ways of acting are either necessary or justified or inconsequential. So we have to buy into a set of lies, don't we? We have to buy into a set of lies that allow us to think of ourselves as good, smart people while we do stupid, rotten things. So I always ask my students to go out into the woods, think together about what are the lies that sustain our idiocy, and they come back with hundreds, of which I have chosen 10. So I thought that I would just list for you the top 10 lies and invite you as writers, as thinkers, as scientists, as journalists, as filmmakers, to tell the truth about any one of these. And that would be good work in the world. So here they are. Number 10. I'll start from the top. I'll start from 10 like David Letterman. 10, that we can have it all. Endlessly mining the earth and the seas and never pay a price. That we can liquidate our assets, hold this giant going out of business sale, and never have to go out of business. Number 9, the corollary that everything is for sale. The mountains in Aspen, the water in Alaska, the lakeside property everywhere, everything has its price. Nothing is sacred. The glorious world is a commodity. It's the analog of a pork belly. Number 8, there is no tomorrow. Or if there is, it's not our problem. Or if it's our problem, there's nothing one person can do. Number 7, what you don't have to pay for has no real cost. Not cultural dislocation or downstream pollution or long-stream health effects, grief, extinction, shortages, not dried up strings, not lowered water tables. Number 6, what you can't see can't hurt you. Number 5, the government-assisted accumulation of corporate wealth will result in the greatest good for the greatest number. Why? Because, a rising tide raises all ships, or private enterprise is the best regulator of distribution, or wealth trickles down, or the fittest survive, who cares? Because an act is right if it creates the greatest wealth for the greatest number of people, or, even better, an act is right if it creates unimaginable wealth for the lucky few. Number 4, that technology will find a way to solve every problem, including all those problems created by technology. Number 3, that the earth is endlessly and infinitely resilient. Some time ago there was this Mobil oil ad, and maybe you've seen it. It was a picture of the cloud-splashed earth, and then it had the tagline that said, "Mother Earth is a tough old gal." I wrote them, and I said, if the earth were your mother, she would grab you in one rocky hand and hold you underwater till you no longer bubbled. Number 2, that human beings are separate from and superior to the rest of creation, which was created solely to serve human ends. Number 1, the inevitable disastrous corollary that we can destroy our habitats without destroying ourselves. Tell the truth about any one of these, then your time is well spent. What else? What else do stories do? Quickly and badly said, stories bring ideas to life. This is their particular use. They take abstract general ideas, general impressions, put them in a particular time and place and person, and they follow only one rule, and that was Aaron's rule, which was show, don't tell. Don't tell me, show me. This is important for a whole lot of different reasons. We all know the power of picture. Because stories draw pictures in the mind's eye, they have a similar kind of power. They are like seeing that direct. And it's the power of the particular. It's the power of a person in a place, this hard-edged image that no abstraction can match. Also because stories invite us to put ourselves in another person's place, they create a connection to imagining ourselves in another's life. I could be Ishmael. I could be beloved. I could be Tom Joad. And so stories are an exercise. They exercise the immoral imagination. And this, I think, is the beginning of empathy and compassion. Tony says, I think very beautifully, that a story can take science and all its abstraction and create a connection to human beings, that science provides what the human imagination needs to create a world. What we need are writers of all kinds imagining what the world might become, showing real people doing the best they can in the struggling, warming, tossing, feverish world. He says what we need is a $25,000 prize in literature for the great global warming novel. I think that's not a bad idea. But since none of us has $25,000, I'm going to give all of my students a copy of Jeffrey's graph. Remember that jagged one going up in time? And I'm going to put a little X for each student, and they get to go to that place, figure out what the world would be like then, and write a story about it. And then we'll collect these all in a chronology. Better idea yet, get some good writers to do that. That would be really cool. Or maybe what this conference should do next year is bring the creative writers together with the scientists to tell these stories. At any rate, we need to make it real. All those graphs and projections, we need to make it real. And what is real for human beings, paradoxically, is often fiction, right? These small stories of people struggling to hold on to life and human decency, the universal story. So I'm arguing that stories tell the truth, that stories bring ideas to life, and there's one more thing, that stories can take us directly from the natural world into the moral world. That nature writers like David, like Rachel Carson, like Lewis Thomas, like Richard Nelson, are describing the natural world. That's all they're doing. That's their calling. And what they're saying is, look, Just look at this city street. Look at this magpie. Look at this bread mold. Look at this virus. Look at this constellation as if you have never seen a morning or bread mold before. And then the astonishing fact of the world is revealed, that there is something rather than nothing, and that it is wonderful. And this profound seeing, I think, has radical moral consequences, because I think it closes the distance between what is on the one hand and what ought to be on the other hand. If this is the way the world is, extraordinary, surprising, mysterious, beautiful, bountiful, contingent, then this is how I ought to act in the world, with caring, with gratitude, with celebration, with joy, with the profound determination that this must remain, and with the moral conviction that I have to do my part to make sure that's the case. So stories can tell the truth. Stories can bring ideas to life. Stories can bring us into a world of compassion and caring. So this is the essay that I want to do next. It's called This Improvisational Heart. In what turned out to be the last week of my father's life, I flew to Ohio and found him sleeping in his bedroom with the blinds drawn and the lights off. No flowers, no Mozart, no bird song, just the bare room in brown shadows. It startled me, this grim room, and I blamed myself for staying away so long and leaving his care to nurses. Without waking him, I went straight into the backyard and cut armloads of apple blossoms and lilacs and stuffed them overflowing into vases, filling his room with flowers. I tiptoed around, bringing in a tape player and the music he loved, the triumphant choruses. I put his alarm clock in the drawer. Does a dying man need to count time passing? Then opened the curtains so light fell on the flowers, and raised the windows to let in the smell of new-mown lawn. But when my father woke up and looked around, he cried because he thought he was dead. I didn't learn this until evening, and then I heard it from the nurses who had comforted him. They were nice about it, told me not to feel bad. How could I have known? But I should have known how to take care of my own father. Should have, but didn't. I stripped the room, putting his alarm clock back in exactly the same place, closed the blind, and sat by my father in the dark. That first night, the nurse had quietly opened the door to the room where I was sleeping. I saw her silhouetted in the slit of light. "What?" I said suddenly, and sat up. "Your father can't sleep," she whispered. "He wonders if you could tell him a story or sing to him." A story. Sing to my father. When I was a child, I knew how to love my parents. Loving came naturally, like eating when you're hungry. When I was a parent, no one had to tell me how to love my daughter and my son. But this was something new, to be the mother to my father. I put my hand on his arm as if I were trying to hold him there, and I told him a story about how he once owned an electric lawnmower with a long extension cord, and how he ran the lawnmower over the cord, cutting it cleanly in two, that snap, that puff of acrid smoke, how he carried the lawnmower to the basement to replace the cord, and what he said when he mowed over the new cord the very next week. All the while I'm thinking, Kathy, you idiot, this man is dying, and the last words he's going to hear are, "You smelled of grass and burning insulation." But eventually he fell asleep, and several days later my father died. So now he knows if being dead is what he thought it would be, lilacs and apple blossoms and his alarm clock gone. There may have been a time when it made sense to think the earth was a parent who gave us life, fed us, cooled us, cleaned us, rocked us, instructed us, sang to us. But the metaphor is getting more complicated in a hurry. How many insults can a body endure before its natural healing processes give out and it starts to change? The land and the seas will endure, but the great systems that sustain us, Earth's life-giving cycles, the circles of heating and cooling, plants breathing in and breathing out, the cycles of the seasons, the great ocean currents, are changing in ways we don't understand. What are we to do, we lonely children, telling stories in the night? There's no way around this. We must become the caretakers of our places. We have to take moral responsibility for the well-being of the air, the water, the land. And if this makes our relation to the earth complicated and painful, maybe that shouldn't come as a surprise. A change is required of us, Linda Hogan wrote in Dwellings. Caretaking is the utmost spiritual and physical responsibility of our time. And perhaps that stewardship is finally our place in the web of life, our work, the solution to the mystery of who we are. But say you accept that. Say you agree that humans have an obligation to care for the earth. What does that mean in particular in this time and place? What are you going to do? The point I want to make is that it isn't easy to know. You can't assume you know what to do. Everything changes around you and you can't do nothing, but something is often the wrong thing, and what you do in one place has unexpected effects 100 miles away or 100 years in the future. I had brought salmon as a gift to my father. Alder smoked salmon, the finest gift from the place I live. But his kidneys were too damaged to handle the salt, and just the smell of it made him sick. I should have known that. Please, he said, get rid of it. So I dropped the salmon into a paper bag, stepped out the back door of his house, and walked to the trash can under a dark sky where ozone fingered thin air and great currents of wind warmed in unpredictable ways. And in my father's yard, a single kilder called and called from the dark beyond the fence. What is to be done? Care has many meanings. One isn't enough. To care for means to have a love or fondness for. To care for means to attend to the needs of. But before there were these verbs, there was the noun, the root of all caring. Care comes from the Greek word charis, a lament, a song of sadness. We never do enough for our parents, and our timing is off at critical times. But isn't sitting with them part of the caring we must do? To be in touch with our place in the family of living things, to be attentive to the pain and mortality that are part of being alive, to tell stories about who we are in relation to the people and the places we love, and sometimes to sit quietly in the dark and cry. I want my stories to make an argument. That should make my philosophical colleagues apoplectic. But I do want my stories to make an argument for an ethic of care. I want them to say that human beings are creatures who are drawn to each other. We're drawn into these networks of dependencies and complications. We are born into connections. We are born into webs of relations. We are creatures who are born to love. How desperately we value those relationships. And because we do, it makes perfect sense that we ought to commit ourselves to acting in ways that would sustain, increase, strengthen, reweave the webs of relationship that we value. That's the beginning of the social ethic of care. But we're born into relationships also with the land, not just with human beings, also with the land. And don't I value also the places that create me and sustain me? Don't I value also the emotional connections that root me to the land and anchor me at sea? And doesn't that kinship with the land have moral consequences too? So I'll be the third person this week to call for a new ethic. Call it an ecological ethic of care. Call it a moral ecology. It's an ethic that's built on caring for people and caring for places, and on the intricate and beautiful ways that love for places and love for people nurture each other and sustain us all. What do stories tell us about how I ought to act in the world? I'll close with Mary Oliver, Wild Geese. You can say it with me if you know it. You do not have to be good. You don't have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the families of things. But now, what returns me to work is facing the possibility that the world doesn't go on, that the clear pebbles of the rain no longer move across the landscape over the prairies and the deep trees, and the wild geese do not head home again in the clean blue air. Wherever you are, whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting. How will you answer? Thank you.